Well, welcome everybody to the June edition of the Oregon City Business Alliance webinar forum. We are in very unique times these days. We are eagerly looking forward to moving out of phase 1 here in Clackamas County into phase 2 so that we can be engaging with each and every one of you again at the Abernathy Center. We miss that. We always look forward to that. But we know right now we've got to be safe and we've got to practice social distancing until such time that we get the green light to go forward. So we want to thank you again for taking time out of your schedules today to join us. As you know, the governor has called a special legislative session that's going to start tomorrow morning, but there's a lot of meetings already taking place behind the scenes prior to that. But we're honored to have Representative Mark Meek with us today from District 40, House District 40, and we're hoping to have Christine Drazan. She entered into a meeting at 9:30 this morning that was scheduled to complete at 11:30. And then yesterday afternoon, I talked to her because it is allowing public testimony. They've extended the time frames for that aspect of it until 12:30. So we're going to start with Mark's presentation and then go into Q&A. And then when when Christine joins us, we'll allow her to go ahead and make a presentation and continue our Q&A. Today, I'm fortunate to have as our co-host Sherry Henson, who will be asking all of your questions. So feel free to go ahead and submit questions. We will be able to access them. And then Sherry will be forwarding them to Mark until Christine gets here. And William Gifford is also a co-host for us today. And Sherry Himes is behind the scenes, making sure this all works. So with that being said, Representative Mark Meek, would you like to take over?
Yes, thank you very much, Kent. Good morning, and good morning. Well, it's still 11:30. Members of Oregon City Business Alliance. My name is Mark Meek, and I'm the state representative for House District 40, which includes Oregon City, Gladstone, Jennings Lodge, Johnson City, and sections of unincorporated Clackamas County. And it's been my honor to serve for the last 2 terms, and I've just completed our short session in February of 2020. And at the end of that, which was March 8th, I believe it was, is when things started to really come to fruition of I guess the severity of this pandemic and the COVID-19. And so ever since then, we have been all isolated and being, maintaining our social distance and kind of staying at home, working from home. During that time, it's been amazing. I've been working harder than I ever did during a session. With so much to respond to and consider, I just want to give you kind of a snapshot of the work I've been doing and the work that I've been trying to do to make sure that our community as a whole and all the segments that it represents, which includes our education system, our businesses, our healthcare, and our housing. There are so many things that are just intertwined that have been affected by this pandemic. And one of the main concerns that we've been trying to address is our small businesses that have been affected. And as you all know, the CARES Act came out that presented and provided payroll protection for our smaller employers, small businesses, which at the federal level is categorized as 500 employees or less. Well, our state is made up of 98% of small businesses, which the majority of them, if you wanted an average, is fewer than 100 employees, and more representative in our community is more like 10 or less employees. And a lot of those businesses that have been struggling, trying to just keep the lights on and pay their mortgages, and we're not able to access some of those programs initially. Now, the second tranche, some of the funds were returned, and a lot of our great local community banks, which Sherry, you're one of them, and several others. I've, as a member of these local banks myself, I was reached out to by them asking if I needed support. I got their information. I passed along those details and applications to our business owners, and the majority of them were able then to access these protection, payroll protection checks and relief. But as you all know, you're all small business owners and property owners, et cetera. You know that this was basically kind of just a little small of a bit of a prop up to allow them to just barely maintain some of the just minimum expenses that we all have to deal with, our fixed expenses, we want to call them. And but they were able actually to rehire some of their employees and provide some services for our communities in different ways. What I've been working on at the state, though, and I'm very proud of our city of Oregon City, they were able to actually, through some programs, allocated $200,000 in grants to our small businesses that actually help them pay for some of their expenses directly. So we're working on many different streams and funding mechanisms to help our small businesses survive. But we know absent the robust economic activity we're used to, it's going to be very difficult for our businesses to survive. So as we move forward to our special session tomorrow, there are some legislative concepts meant to deal with and try to help some of our small businesses and our businesses in general. Another thing that we've been working on, and I have now been appointed to be on the Education Policy Committee. I am on the Education Subcommittee for Ways and Means, so I approved their budget during the 2019 session, and we listened to some recommendations in 2020 short session, but now I'm on the Policy Committee also. And in that capacity, we've had hearings the last 3 weeks previously, and listened to our Oregon Department of Education and our Higher Education Coordinating Commission to determine how are we going to get our students back to their studies. And I'm very, very concerned about our youth and go through the K-12 system, because the final quarter of 2020 school year was all distance learning. And as a grandparent, I have a grandson that is in 2nd grade, and basically my son did his best, but he said it just was no comparison. And a lot of these parents have a greater respect for our educators out there, I'll tell you that. And many of you have been experiencing the same, you know what I'm talking about. So our goal is to figure out and help our school districts get back open and safely open so that our families and our children can get back to their studies, but based on certain criteria that the Oregon Health Authority has presented and provided to our school districts. So through that capacity, I am hopeful that our own school districts right here, Oregon City School Districts, North Clackamas, Gladstone, they're able to work out a system that will provide a safe environment for our families to get back to school. I just wanted to reiterate, since this all began, I have spent countless hours calling our community leaders, our city councilors, commissioners, county commissioners, our school board members, our school superintendents, to find out what they're doing and what kind of relief, what kind of support they need from me as their state representative and or from our legislative body. As everybody has experienced, all of the relief and all the actions to support our businesses, our schools, our tenants, our healthcare have all been through executive orders. And that's why it's important now that the legislature actually get together and provide the response and representation that for our communities to make sure we pass both emergency relief for our communities that is necessary and based on our own experiences and our unique understanding of our community's needs. And I will be advocating and working this next several days during this special session to make sure I represent our communities, both our businesses, our educations, our healthcare systems, and all the rest. So this special session, there are many concepts. Let me just kind of give you a precursor to what a normal special session involves. I've only been involved with one so far, and it was related to a response to revenue, I think it was in 2019. And it needed to fix. And so in that special session, there was one item, one bill that was going to be, and one issue that was going to be resolved. And the governor called us in, our minority leader, majority leaders, the speaker, the Senate president, they all knew exactly what that concept was going to be, what that bill was going to be. We went in, gavelled down, voted on it, and we were out the same day. This is a much more unique special session with 21 concepts being introduced and a lot of moving parts. And I don't want to take away from Representative Drazan's presentation, but there are different categories. And give me a second, I need to pull up one of my screens with a PDF here. I'll get a little over my monitor here. 1 second. We have into three different categories. One is police accountability. As we all know, there's a lot of unrest, and there's been a lot of demonstrations. The brutal killing of some of our people of color and our Black citizens around the United States. And as a member of the People of Color Caucus, I was a member of presenting some of the police accountability concepts that we're going to be presenting during this session. I can discuss some of those issues. So that's police accountability, I think, one of the categories that follow up on joint committee on coronavirus response, which related to evictions, special eviction moratorium, some foreclosure protections, and some little smaller things related to responding to our current state of affairs, and some actually that were from the short session that we did passed. And then the final category is economic recovery and other needs. So we have some minor fixes and tweaks. Let me briefly tell you about, it's called the Forestry Memorandum, and I can't remember what MOU stands for, but basically what was going on was the Forestry Department and the environmentalists were working on getting relief from the federal government in certain qualifications to move forward in a much more economical and sustainable way. And they came to this agreement that was supposed to be passed in the short session. And absent that, we will lose millions of dollars of support from the federal government. So we need to get that passed. So that's kind of like some unfinished business that needs to be completed. And then we're also have some couple of, I want to say technical fixes. The corporate activities tax, we had a bill introduced in 2020, the special session or short session, that would have given some relief to some certain businesses and tweaked the calculations that they were supposed to be taxed on, and those were not able to be passed. So we're going to be doing a couple of those little small tweaks. And then looks like there's going to be a broadband rural telecommunications bill that will actually help some of our rural communities to get broadband out in their communities. So that is kind of a quick summary of the bills we're going to be working on. And I want to just go back really quickly, and then I'll open it up for questions. And Kent, you can let me know if I need to expand or cut it off, let me know. But as we all know, our communities of color, and let me just mention this, I represent our community with many different backgrounds. I'm a small business owner, so I understand our business community. I'm a realtor, so I understand what the American dream is and what it means to our neighbors and our families and our communities. I'm a person of color, and I've lived through some just the bullying things that happen as you go through grade school, and some of the inequities and prejudices that just are there, and they're underlying our society. And I survived, But it's amazing. Some of our neighbors do not realize some of the, I guess, uncomfortable situations we have to go through just to survive on a daily basis sometimes. And so I represent, people of color, and I represent veterans. I'm a veteran. I served our country, and I love that. And I'm a father and a parent, so I represent our community in many different ways. But when it comes to the police accountability, I was also a security policeman in the Air Force, and I was taught the use of force. I carried a .38 sidearm and an M16, and I was proficient as an expert on both of those. And it was my duty to, protect our property and people, including myself. And through that, I learned a lot. I was working with nuclear weapons, and I knew that I had to have personnel. I went through a protocol called the Personnel Reliability Program, and I had to have meet certain standards of fitness, both physical fitness and mental fitness, and behavioral fitness. And as you can tell, you don't want somebody that's a thief to be a police officer. So one of my friends shoplifted a little wallet because he wanted to get something for his girlfriend, her picture, at the BX store there on base, and was a fellow security police officer, and he was discharged and broken rank and kicked out of the police force. So it's a zero tolerance at the federal and national level in the military. When our police accountability bills, we're not trying to defund the police. We're not trying to make our communities less safe. We're actually trying to make all of our members of our community to feel safe in their own neighborhoods. And through this, we want to make sure that we're both training, retaining, and recruiting qualified officers that represent our communities and represent the values that we want in protecting our communities, and that they engage all of our members of our community in the same way, not with prejudice, not with bias, but with an understanding that that person is trying to get home to their family also. So we were looking at those things. We're going to be tracking some police discipline records, making sure that if somebody was disciplined for inappropriate behavior or dangerous behavior, and somehow they left one police force, that they can't just jump across the state or even across the county and work for a different law enforcement agency. And so we want to make sure there's better tracking of those, and that we weed out if they're not good to be protecting our communities. These people should not be policing our communities. Also, we put in some concepts that would be mandatory to report and intervene when an officer is involved with or witnessing harmful acts or acts that are improper or inappropriate. It's easy, as somebody that was in the military, I always was told you have to obey orders. But I was also taught that you can disobey an unlawful order. And when it comes to an unlawful order, certain techniques should not be allowed to occur. And that brings me to the next segment, that we are eliminating the restraining and or use of chokeholds, or even the activity of restricting somebody's ability to breathe. I think that's very important, and we're looking at the actual use of force that our law enforcers should be allowed to use. And in a peace officer role, their duty is to maintain and establish peace. And if they strike fear to the hearts of our neighbors, that is not bringing peace to our community. And it just brings unrest and basically inequities that need to be addressed. So, Kent, that being said, there's much more I could talk and talk and talk, but it's just my honor here to be with you all today. And I'm happy to answer some questions.
All right, Mark, well, we really appreciate you covering so many of those topics in such great detail. I think we can all say that we're in this together. The Oregon City Business Alliance has actually come out with their own position statement on many of these issues, and you'll be able to read that on our website and other social media locations.
Great.
But I think it comes down to everyone being patient, trying to be understanding, be willing to listen as much as possible, and then learn before we act. And if we can put those principles into place, I think we can make great progress on a lot of these challenges that we're going to be facing, not only days, weeks, but months and years going forward. So again, we appreciate you sharing all that information. So Sherry, would you like to start out with the first question for Representative Meek? You got to unmute yourself.
There we go. You
There
can see
we
my
go.
lips moving, but you can't hear me. Thank you, Representative Meek, again for being a panelist today in our forum. And so first question is there more information from Oregon Department of Education or the governor's office regarding her announcement a few weeks ago about forming the Reopening Advisory Council for Oregon schools? Is there someone that parents can contact to learn more or to get involved in that council?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I believe because of the immediacy of this special session that it has been kind of put off a little bit, but I know that it's very important. And I believe that the best resource would be to go to the Oregon Department of Education's website. And if anybody is interested in my district and community, please let me know and I will nominate you. I'll bet you first, but I will happy to talk to you and nominate you for any of these advisory council positions, because I think it's very important that our community be represented and that our voice is heard regarding how we're going to get our students back to school.
Thank you, Mark. Next question, what can be done to resolve the antiquated state unemployment insurance program? I understand 90,000 PUA applications may not even have been looked at yet, and some other claims submittals are being rejected for no particular reason at all. The phone lines are jammed and or just gives continuous busy signals.
And it almost makes me want to just drop from frustration when I hear that. And I didn't mention it, but I've spent countless hours working with members of our community trying to access their, to get the benefits. They've been erroneously denied, and they have been given letters to receive benefits and told to call a certain number and leave a message, and you're correct. There's just no way to get through. And initially in mid-April, I'm on daily briefings with the Oregon Health Authority and the governor's office, and on occasion she brings in the Oregon employment departments. And we had many questions as to what are we doing to respond and get these funds out to our families. And the issue is they are dealing with an antiquated system. And it is very frustrating. They're programming with COBOL, and as a young college student in the 1980s, I was programming computers with COBOL, and the generations and the improvements of technology since then have way surpassed the capabilities of those programming. And so the issue is antiquated, absolutely, software and database management systems. But one of my biggest pet peeves, which I let our Speaker of the House and House Majority Leader know, that we can no longer sit back and allow each individual agency throughout the state go out and get RFPs to update their technologies while not considering the integration of the whole state and all the state agencies. For example, the employment department should be able to communicate with the Department of ODOT and DMV and our health authority. And so there's a lot of, I guess, inaccuracies that can occur through the duplicity of information. And I think that it is time for us to, as a legislative body, an executive body, the governor, and all the rest, to get up to date on the necessary technologies it takes to run and provide access to our communities, because this is a travesty. One of the things we're having to deal with during the special session is the continuance of the eviction moratorium for residential tenants. And the reason is because they have not received any money. There are, unfortunately, we have stories and members of our community that are living out of their car or in their friend's backyard in a tent. And it's because they don't have money. They couldn't afford even to pay their utility bills, let alone the rent. And it's very frustrating. It's inappropriate. It's not the right way for us to respond. I believe that we should have put all hands on deck. We should have used every resource we could to get these funds out to our citizens. And it's very frustrating when they get a letter of denial because they said they're not currently looking for work, because we have a little radio button on their online application that they have to answer. And you can't be looking for employment when we're in this pandemic. And so that was one of the other issues that we're trying to just help their antiquated system and get a program in there that can wipe out some of those stupid just roadblocks that are keeping our families from getting the benefits that they need so that they can both survive and care for their families. So I'm sorry to hear that, but we are working on it.
Next question, what are your thoughts on Governor Brown's new policy on requiring everyone to wear masks when they're in a public place while hundreds, if not thousands of protesters gather together with no social distancing and no requirements to wear masks? And a follow-up question is, how will that new requirement be, how can you enforce that?
Yeah, well, let me answer. There's several segments of it. And let me just point out to everybody that if you look across the world, China, South Korea, Japan, everybody wears face masks there. And the reason that you are now it's required that you are recommended to wear a face mask is not that you can keep the virus from getting to you, but in case you were asymptomatic and you're not aware of that, that you would lower the opportunity to spread the virus to other people. And so if in a piece of your own home, your backyard, walking in a park, you don't have to wear a mask. But if you're going to go to a grocery store, the Home Depot, everybody should be wearing a mask. And I know that there are folks that have medical conditions that they shouldn't be, and that you shouldn't have to. But by the fact that other people that can are wearing a mask will give them a more of an opportunity, well, a safe environment in which to be working and shopping. So I totally support the wearing the mask, and it's a small sacrifice to make. We are in the middle of a very dangerous pandemic, and the numbers are going up, not only in our own state, but around our country. And our state has more cases than some countries around the world. And we've done a great job of mitigating and keeping those rates down. Now back to the two other questions. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it's very dangerous behavior and activity to be protesting in the middle of this pandemic. I do understand the need and the want to protest, and I think that their message is being heard. And so, one of the things that we cannot impede is your, First Amendment rights. And everybody wants to talk about your Second Amendment rights, and I'm a very strong supporter of that. But we always got to remember our First Amendment rights, which includes free speech and the freedom of assembly and the freedom of the press. And so, in those cases, what can we do? The police can hardly even just control the potential mobs that have occurred. There have been some mobs, and there have been some peaceful protests. And as always, there's some antagonists involved. But all I can ask is those folks wear masks also, where unfortunately there's going to be a higher rate of exposure, and we're going to see some sicknesses coming from these protests for some people that have not been protected. But when it comes to your freedom of expression and or willingness, not willingness to wear the mask, what are the penalties? Are you going to unnecessarily expose if you're asymptomatic to your family, to your neighbors, to folks in your community that you didn't necessarily wanted to? And here's my issue. Everybody knows that I'm a representative of our community, and I work hard for our community. It's not about politics. It's not about I'm a Democrat and I'm right, or I'm an independent and I'm better. It's, to me, the whole wearing the mask, not wearing the mask has been politicized, and that's a shame because this is a true science-based virus that and these precautions have been recommended by our Centers for Disease Control, a very respected Dr. Fauci, who has spent a lifetime around the world battling these pandemics and knows what it takes to mitigate. If we want to get open and stay open, we want to get open to phase 2 of our county, and I agree that we should not be grouped in with Multnomah and Washington, and I will advocate and fight for that. I have a call with the governor's office tomorrow for this main reason. But when it comes to keeping our communities open, just do the right thing. Wash your hands, wear a mask when you're in close proximity to people that you can't keep from potentially spreading the virus if you have it. And stay home if you're sick. Get tested if you feel you do have the virus, and let people know, and isolate yourself, because instead of everybody having to stay home, the folks that get and contract the virus, if they stay home and contact trace and let people know that they should watch themselves and care for themselves and test themselves, that's how we are going to get the remaining businesses open and responsibly keep our state open. I'm proud of the work we're doing at the state level, and I'm happy and I'm hoping that if the other parts of the country, have to shut down, that we can stay open because of the sacrifices and the work we did to, protect ourselves and our neighbors.
Thank you. Next question. What is your feeling towards the movement to defund police departments while protesters riot, destroying private and public property, and then being released the next day with little to no bail?
Yeah, it's not, I think I mentioned that I'm not about defunding the police. I am about reform to make sure that our police forces are trained to deal with our normal activities. Now we're talking about, riots and different issues and vandalism, and I understand there's been a lot of destruction out there. And those people need to be accountable. There's no free pass. And I do know that the Portland Police and other police entities or agencies that have, where some of these damages have occurred, they are investigating, and they are going to go through tapes and video. If they can find the perpetrators, they need to be arrested and held to the highest level of the law. For some of the folks that were protesting that were arrested maybe for their bad behavior, for not leaving and being released. I mean, I don't know specifically what cases you're talking about where people were arrested and let go the next day, but I do believe in accountability, and that people need to be responsible for their behavior. If they're out destroying other people's property, looting, stealing, that is taking advantage of a situation, and unfortunately very emotional situation that other people are losing, it detracts from the message that the folks that are out there trying to convey about some of the inequities that they want to share.
Next question. We have a lot of questions, which is great. Thanks for everybody's participation. What is your position on ending or retaining qualified immunity?
Oh, yeah, very good question. That's one of the other things I'm talking to the governor about. I've had really strong discussions. I sent emails supporting both our businesses and our actual state agencies and our public agencies, our school districts, that we are in a pandemic. And this virus is all inclusive. And we want to get our economy going. We want to keep our businesses viable. And only through individual responsibility. I know that there's risk in everything we do. And as long, and my hope is that we can bring some limited immunity to our businesses. If you are a good actor, you're following all the Oregon Health Authority protocols, your customers are complying, that you should be immune from what I want to call frivolous lawsuits. In a discussion I had with several attorneys in my caucus, I realized that I'm not armed with the languages that they have, But I did share that my thoughts are that we're not, my goal is not to keep somebody that has been harmed from getting relief if somebody was negligent in their delivery of their services. But if somebody is really truly making a good faith and a strong effort and following the protocols to keep their environment safe, their businesses safe, and their customers safe, they should not be held liable or even open to a frivolous lawsuit that basically it's cheaper to settle than to go through. And even the preponderance of the evidence to have, to defend yourself is very difficult. Just say one person gets sick and then somebody says they got sick there too. I'm definitely fighting for that right now, and you can ask some of the business organizations around the state that I've submitted and signed on to some proposed amendments and actually some proposed action, because unfortunately, and I think Representative Drazan can confirm this, that it's not even going to be part of our solution. So the reason I'm having this conversation with the governor's office, and I've already let the speaker know, that it's irresponsible for us to take action this week in a special session without addressing these issues so that our businesses, our school districts, if somebody comes to school and gets sick, are they able to sue our school districts now? And so there's a lot of inequities, even on the business side or even the open public side, that if a person wants to use your services, they understand that there are some risk involved. But this is well, I want to call it an act of God, and that we cannot mitigate an act of God if you don't want to take responsibility for your own self.
So kind of back to education, is the state considering providing resources and support of alternate means of education?
Yes, well, the state budget is out there. What happens, each school district is autonomous, and they are able to address and apply the different rulings that have been given out for keeping our students safe. And we are working on, this session, we'll be working on and allocating additional funds to our school districts to address and deal with the additional costs and expenses it takes to provide a cleaner and healthier environment for our students. But it's just going to depend on, we sent out, and I don't have the workbook or handbook here that the Oregon Health Authority sent out to each school district, but it was 80 pages long, and it was kind of a spreadsheet and a flow chart of actions that the schools and the school districts will have to take in order to make sure that they have a safe environment. And if they meet certain requirements, then they will be eligible for funding to both have in-school training, or if they have to go fully remote, that they set up a proper learning system that's equitable and fair for all of our students. Because a friend of mine that is a teacher out in the Warrenton area said they don't have internet out there. And so students doing distance learning out there can't even access the distance learning program. So he was very concerned about his students. And so we are definitely addressing and trying to make sure that our school districts have the resources they need to properly engage and provide the best education that we can provide under these circumstances.
Are programs being considered to determine and address root causes of social issues leading to the other side of the policing situations?
I don't understand the question. On the other side of the policing situations, is there like a chat there I should look up?
It's in the Q&A. We can move on to the next question if you want, and maybe that person can follow up.
Oh yeah, the root issues is, and let me kind of go back to some of the, I'd spent 18 months prior to the short session in 2020, February 2020 here. I spent 18 months leading a task force for racial disparities in home ownership. And it was clear that our African-American Black communities were homeowners at less than 50% of our Caucasian communities. And in our Native Americans and our Hispanics actually had higher home ownership rates than our African American and Black communities. And it leads back, and it stems from years and years of just racial biased and unfair practices. If you go back to, redlining and steering, this back in the 50s, there are what they call CC&Rs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions for neighborhoods that homeowner association can develop. And in language that I've come across in the last 20 years of my real estate business, where it says explicitly, no Black person can live in this neighborhood or in these homes, or no Chinese person, it said. There was different references to different ethnicities in these restrictions. And so Oregon is needing to have a wake-up call and understand that these were deep-rooted, these were in law and in practice to keep people of color, where they were. And I always heard, hey, everybody has the same chance, everybody wakes up the same day and can get up and go work and do all that. And in some cases, it's very true. I'm an example of that. I worked my tail off to become a business owner and now a representative of our community. So I know it can be done, but I know it's very difficult, especially if you have things that are holding you back, whether it's opportunity, whether it's access to capital, whether it's access to a good, robust education. And I'm sorry to say, all education is not the same. It's not executed the same in all of our communities. And so there are, some balances that need to be fixed. So we will look at several things, not this special session, but in future, we are working on, healthcare, making sure people, all of our neighbors and community members have good access or affordable access to quality healthcare, understanding what quality health is, access to good, foods, nutritious foods that will, help our families grow and be healthy. So that's one of the things, our law enforcement, how we engage, our education system, housing, all the above. So, and businesses. And the reason I'm a small business owner is I wasn't getting the fair chances within the, corporate world. So I just said, well, I'll work my tail off for myself. And so it's all history now.
During economic downturns, community colleges often see sharp increases in enrollment coupled with decreased funding from the state. This makes serving an increased number of students challenging, if not impossible. As economic engines in the community that helps get people back to work, how can the legislature ensure continued adequate funding to community colleges?
Yeah, so I remember I mentioned I was on the subcommittee for education, and I fought hard to get our community colleges the additional funding they need. They don't get the resource, they don't have the resource, they don't have the access that some of our larger state universities, even our private ones, have. And it's more difficult for the families, like I was mentioning, to afford these tuition rates. And so it was my goal we were addressing and analyzing all of the state's community colleges to find out if they were increasing their rates too abruptly. And if they were, we were questioning them. And we were going to, I'm sorry to say, penalize them by not providing them, with resources if we don't feel that they're providing, they're not taking really proper or dealing with their administrative costs the way they should be. And we got some feedback and we passed those budgets. But in a situation like now, where you're right, where the funding goes down, but the access to it is increased because people are looking to retrain. These service jobs just don't pay, and actually they're more vulnerable than any other jobs. I'm a big, strong proponent of our trades, whether it be plumbing, electricians, carpenters. There's so many great opportunities out there, and it's one of my goals to make sure that we continue providing affordable access to college. That's my story. I got my education paid for by the Air Force. They paid 75% of my tuition, so I still had to pay 25. And it's important and valuable that you have to invest in your own education. So I get it. And but it has to be affordable, and it has to be something in which they have access to and can survive while getting getting that training and that education they need to have a better life. So we'll be looking at all these education budgets in hopefully a special session in the next couple of weeks. And I'll be on that subcommittee fighting for our colleges and all, but including our community colleges.
Thank you. I think you talked a little bit about this, Representative Meek. I think you said you had a call into the governor's office regarding that we were lumped together with Washington and Multnomah County. And so the question is being asked, will you stand with us in requesting the governor reverse her decision so that we can move forward and retain as many businesses and jobs as possible?
Absolutely. We don't, I've been part of my work with our Clackamas caucus. We have, we call it the Clackamas Caucus of Legislators. It's representatives and senators. And I've been very supportive of that. And I'm a very involved member. And the reason for even developing this, I sat at a breakfast like 4 years ago after my first term, and realized we had a lot of great representatives that were at this Clackamas County meeting. And, but a lot of the legislative priorities were all being based off of Multnomah County and Portland and Washington County. And I looked around and wondered why we weren't more of a stronger force to reckon with. So this last year in 2019, we finally kind of got our work together. We worked on some transportation issues, the courthouse, and I know that's not a popular, subject, but it's a very important one. But through that alliance together, that we were able to protect Clackamas County in our interests, because absent us working hard for our own community, we're going to be left on the table. And so, yes, I will stand with you in getting, requesting the governor to not lump us in. We've been doing great, and we've been working hard as a county to open up, and we do not need to be kind of tallied in with their results. We have our own health authority, our health care system. We've done all the right work, and our county commissioners are doing their best to keep us open. So I will stand and support them.
We have a couple more questions, but Kent, I'm wondering if we need to pivot to Christine, or do you want me to continue asking questions? You're muted. Unmute.
Hey, Representative, thanks for all your work today. I know you had a long day so far.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. I know that you were wondering if you'd be able to get out of that special meeting this morning that started at 9:30. So we're fortunate to have you. Do you have any energy left?
Endless. It was actually a very short meeting compared to how long they'd scheduled it. So they ended early, which we all needed, given how much time we spent preparing for these conversations. So it's great to be here and to not miss this meeting today. Thanks for having me.
No, we're honored to have you as well. Well, Mark's been doing a fantastic job in answering all the questions that our participants have been submitting so far. Why don't we just go ahead and submit some questions now to Representative Drazan and let her respond to them. Sherry?
Thank you. I'm glad somebody else can answer some.
I'm here for you, Mark.
So we want to go ahead and ask some questions then?
Well, or Christine, would you like to go ahead and make a statement before we start that?
Oh my goodness, I'm always happy to talk, Kent, and it's been a really busy time. We are preparing to go into this special session tomorrow. I am really looking forward to the opportunity to do some good bipartisan work together in support of some policies that are responsive to the impacts of coronavirus, and also to do everything we can to come back and unify Oregon. We had today's committee discussion was all about the legislation put forward by the People of Color Caucus. And it appears that the majority of those concepts will move forward with some version of amendment. And a few of those ideas may or may not quite be ready yet. But those conversations, I think, are really productive and important conversations to have. At the same time, my push for this whole time has been to remember that our constitutional obligation right now is to maintain a balanced budget. And we are talking about going into a special session where we aren't doing anything relative to the budget. And that is and continues to be of concern to me. The longer we push off our decisions around an agency rebalance, the steeper those cuts are going to be. And for our schools and for our safety net, community colleges, higher ed, the whole gamut, they need some certainty that only our participation in a rebalance will provide. Outside of our opportunity to come in and give some guidance, all they have is the governor's across the board allotment cuts. Now, allotment cuts in a moment of crisis like this, when we are managing public health and kind of a cratered economy, I shouldn't even say kind of, given the unemployment numbers right now, we really need to do a surgical look at a budget rebalance that's careful. And across the board cuts that are the option that is available to the governor, should we not be called in, I think would be draconian at best, and really, really problematic to position us to pull out of this economic crisis and to protect the dollars that actually bring down more federal money and protect the investments that pull us out of a recession, specifically around education and retraining. And so it's important that we come in. As I understand it, there is a plan to bring us back in at a future date that's not too far down the road. I would have preferred that we did more now and still left some space for, right, Mark? Because everybody needs to know, like, what is our plan? This is the time to be clear. It's the time to be transparent, let people engage. And as we've seen from this process right now, we have what started off with a list of about a dozen bills has grown substantially. And so the problem, which isn't always a bad thing, a lot of these have a lot of support and they're perfectly good ideas. But the problem with that is that we then have a need to vet these issues within our current environment. Things have changed since the short session. They've certainly changed since the long session in our economy and in our state. And so it takes time to vet some of these concepts. And we are already finding that some of these amendments may or may not be ready for tomorrow. And we're kind of 11th hour preparing what this session is going to look like. That is not going to help us stay on track for a really short, narrow session. And it also creates this uncertainty as to whether or not it ends up being bipartisan or if it ends up being political. I'm really hoping for a bipartisan session and not a political show, because that's what this crisis calls for. It calls for unity. To the extent that we can achieve it. It doesn't call for a unanimous approach to how we govern our state. Nobody expects that. People will always have different ideas on how to approach these very important questions. But it is important that we do our best to come together and compromise right now on those issues that have a difference in opinion on who will be affected and how do you balance these various interests out there. Some of the most contentious issues right now under discussion sound really great from the outside. If you talk about an eviction moratorium, I can absolutely understand why people would feel like that was something worth considering right now. And it's possible with appropriate sideboards that is something that we should continue to consider. But the legislation that's before us is expansive and broad and shifts the burden in a way that assumes that we don't expect economic recovery. That's the thing that always concerns me, is when we build policies that assume that we are not planning on finding a way out of this recession. Because you need those protections if you assume that people have no pathway to work. If there's no opportunity for people to have cash in their pockets and in their bank accounts, there needs to be a strong safety net. The question becomes, is the safety net a moratorium on foreclosures, a moratorium on evictions, or is the safety net an extension of unemployment insurance benefits? Is the safety net cash payments? Is the safety net an expansion of some of our existing pathways to help people pay their bills and stay in their housing? And so there's stuff that we've been talking about utility assistance and childcare assistance. And there's a lot of ways that we can work together to provide for the needs of families that find themselves unexpectedly unemployed right now as we reassert our standards for safety. So that was a really long way to say, I wish we had done budget. And we have a lot on our plate in the next couple of days.
So speaking of budget, what are the economists, the state economists saying that will be the shortfall this year, and how much is that being replenished by the federal government through loans, grants, or any other type of financial assistance?
So at a federal level right now, there are limitations on the money that has come down from the CARES Act. It cannot be spent to fill our budget hole. Can't be used to fill the budget gap. It has to address coronavirus, and it can, of course, go to address the economy. There were parameters in the distribution of those funds that allow for a variety of uses, but it strictly prohibited the use by the states to backfill budgets. And so part of, as I understand it from the governor, part of her thinking on this is that if she waits on the budget, there's the possibility that the federal government will act, that we will see more movement. And I have been on meetings constantly. I feel like I'm the last person to know as things move in Congress sometimes. But that is what people, me and Mark together, the two of us with that. But that is the thing I know that the governor is waiting for and looking for. And right now that has not come to pass. But the budget hole is about $1.9 billion in general fund and lottery, about $2.9 billion all in the current year. They anticipate that number to grow substantially in the next budget cycle, 21-23. And we had $1.1 billion ending fund balance. We have about $1.6 billion, as I understand it, all in for all of our reserve funds. And so we have the opportunity to tap into the Education Stability Fund, right, at this moment for schools. That fund has a cap of $1 billion on it. We're about to hit that cap. And should the legislature choose to tap into that to cover base budgets in some future biennia, it would create a little bit more headroom, because once you hit the cap, that money no longer flows, of course, to that reserve fund, which isn't a bad thing. But it also means there's an opportunity potentially that might be the better fund to tap into first and stabilize our schools moving forward and provide certainty there. I don't know what the pathway will be for that, but I do think that should be an issue that's discussed. I don't think that we should use the reserve funds for expansion programs. I don't think we should use it to backfill expansion, but I think we absolutely have to use it for safety net and make sure that our base budgets are met.
Okay, great. Well, Sherry, how many questions do we have?
We actually have quite a few more. And so, I think our attendees would probably like Christine or Representative Drazan to answer some of the questions that Mark already did. But
Right.
this one has not been asked yet. So regarding bicycle pedestrian shared bike routes, curious if there's been conversation of posting safety signs for both cyclists and pedestrians. Witnessed bicyclists racing or speed through bike paths and pedestrians almost being run or injured or run over. Maybe create safety signs or bike pedestrian lanes at some point.
So this is a really interesting issue, generally speaking. I've always found it kind of awkward that we have used highway funds and our road dollars to build bike paths. And then that means that all of our bike lanes are in the right of way alongside cars. I've always found it that if we had thought about how we wanted to fund our bike traffic, if we had funded it differently, I think we'd have a more safe system overall. If we had said we're going to have a fund source and we're going to, invest in bike lanes, I don't know that we would have invested in bike lanes intentionally rather than through kind of expedient measures in a way that they are in such close proximity to motorists all the time that they're on the road. And so I do think that there are real safety concerns there. And I did not serve on the transportation committee in session. And I know that there are a variety of ways that local governments engage in these issues and have a lot of responsibility for a lot of bike lanes where they would be the ones addressing that unless there was a state mandate for signage. But clearly safety is a big issue, and it's not one that I'm aware of having been addressed in the legislative process, but I'm gonna admit a little bit of a lack of depth of knowledge in this category, just because I didn't have the opportunity to serve on that particular committee.
Well, we did have some great questions before we were able to
Yeah.
join. So I agree with you, Sherry. Maybe we should run a few of those by Representative Drazan.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to ask one, a new one came up specifically for Representative Drazan. So what are the top 5 budget cuts you feel would best serve to balance the budget? And please be specific.
So I do not believe that at this time that we should be expanding some of the programs that when we were in the midst of some of the, the longest economic expansion in a generation, we adopted some new programming that I don't know that we can continue to sustain in this moment. So I would start with new programming. Just to preface this, there is no budget cut that doesn't have a constituency to advocate for it. It's in the budget because someone needs it, loves it, sees the vision, and is deeply invested in it. That's how budgets are built. Someone comes and makes their case, and it's a good cause, and we have the resources, and we fund it. But that doesn't mean that circumstances don't change and priorities don't need to shift in tight budget times. So from my perspective, I would make reductions in investments in the James Beard public market. It's been a 20-year program that's never gotten off the ground, never come to fruition. The legislature in this round decided to continue to fund a discussion of the James Beard public market. I'm sure it's a great idea, but it's Portland-centric. Portland should take on responsibility. It's not a statewide benefit. I would make reductions in universal home visits. Right now, we have dramatic expansion in funding for folks to go in to families with newborns and provide universal coverage. I would make reductions in that program. It's not that it's not worthwhile. When I was a new mom, I would have welcomed somebody coming in and helping me make sure that everything was going smoothly with my kiddos. But I think that it's a voluntary program in the first place. And with social distancing and all the concerns that we have related to engagement inside people's homes and in close proximity, it seems like this is a good time to put that program on pause. I would also support reductions in some of our capital projects. Now that we have reduced lottery dollars, I don't even believe that the original cap for how much we could invest towards capital projects is still valid. We have seen reductions in both general fund and lottery to the extent that I think that it's important to review those projects. I do think, though, that as we know, capital projects provide a needed stimulus that the state can engage in to make sure that construction jobs continue. We have some real economic impact benefits from ongoing capital projects that are invested in by the state. At this time, I would focus on the transportation side of that to the extent that those haven't also been reduced dramatically by reduced receipts from gas sales and gas taxes. But I would really focus on that side of investment right now over some of our capital projects that we've looked at. I would also reduce some of our early learning hubs and some of our expansion of systems and bureaucracy. I would invest in our childcare centers themselves, but the bureaucracy and the systems that have been proposed now are intended to provide additional supports that have not been there as far as systems go. This is the moment where I would prioritize direct benefits to Oregonians over the development of new bureaucracy, new structures, and new systems. I would also, as you can imagine, cut about $25 million right now that the governor has invested in executive orders and expansion of her cap and trade proposal through executive orders throughout her agencies. And so there are a lot of places that I would go inside the state budget and begin to look to help rebalance it. I think that when it comes to the Student Success Act, as much investment in that category as I know people feel for the value and the importance of finally funding schools fully, this is a time to fully fund our base budget. And I actually think our base budget is at risk if we draw down our reserves too quickly. or if we build up expectations around growth programs in that category. I think we put our schools in a very tenuous situation where we try to hold down class sizes while at the same time we're asking them to expand programs when we don't even know if our students will be on site or not. So if we're investing in hands-on learning and our kids aren't actually in their science classrooms and they're not actually, you know, at school using those, using their skills in that way, and instead more online, some of those programs I think would make sense for now to have cost savings there.
Okay. Just to expand a little bit, since you're talking about the school system and the school budget, Mark addressed or talked about resources for alternate means of education. Is the state considering providing resources and support for education outside of the school system, one of which is homeschooling or community-based schooling?
So, excuse me while I dig around for a cord so that my computer doesn't die on you guys. I'm living on the computer right now.
Okay.
And I have this terrible feeling that I'm gonna lose you if I don't focus. Outside funding for schools, I am a big proponent of this moment being a moment that we can look at our schools and redefine our expectations for what we consider to be acceptable standards for performance and learning. And I think that families are going to need to have more choice in how they engage and what supports their students as the learning environment begins to evolve in response to this public health crisis. And so the opportunity to have online learning, homeschooling, charter schools that are uniquely suited to this moment, I think we need to have an all-in approach to education right now, where we say, the student's learning has to come first. What will best serve that? And so I haven't seen the details of what Mark's proposing, but it sounds, you know, the way you described it sounds like something I'd be really interested in. Okay, give me 2 seconds while I try to do this cord.
Okay, thank you.
I'll let you do that. I didn't propose anything. I'm just saying that as these different school districts are giving us their analysis of how they plan to open, we will be able to invest in different school districts different ways.
Well, and we did have a proposal up that was under discussion initially in this special session for tomorrow that would have expanded access to virtual schools from a 3% cap to a 3.5% cap. And the Senate version had an 8% cap. And in all cases, that did not have support, as I understand it, on the Democrat side of the aisle to do any expansion of the virtual schools. But I hope that that's an issue that we can revisit if there is adequate public support where families think that there's value add there. I hope that we can work with our stakeholders and find a path forward there. But at this point in this special session, I don't think that issue will move forward right now.
Representative Meek responded to a question about whether the governor's decision to link Clackamas together with Washington and Multnomah counties in moving into phase 2 was a good decision. Can you respond?
So I got a heads up from Alana, who's the governor's legislative director in her office. And she called me to let me know that that was the announcement the governor was going to make. And I was on the phone with her and I said, Alana, I apologize in advance for all the terrible things I'm going to say about this decision. Like, that is not necessary. I don't think it's the right decision. I think that it was politically motivated to get cover to Multnomah County because Multnomah County is moving so slowly, and they get to do that, right? Like, they get to make that choice. They are their own jurisdiction. But I think that they were being adversely impacted economically when all of the surrounding counties were going to move forward, and they were not. So I think that it was some version of tapping the brakes in deference to Portland that I do not think serves Clackamas County. I think we had every right to move forward at our own pace based on what's happening and the outcomes that are occurring in our own county. And I encourage the governor to revisit that issue quickly. And so for now, she's not open to it, but I continue to have those conversations with her when we meet weekly, that I'm trying to identify what exactly her concerns were that forced her to make that decision. And it sounds like it was a little bit of moving the goalposts and saying that that at this time, indications are that the regions are too connected, not to connect them with the phasing decision, which if that's the case, then it should be that statewide. and they could have connected us to Marion County. I mean, they could have made a lot of different choices for which region we were connected to. She said that part of it was that she couldn't identify and more specifically narrow who might be phased differently outside of the counties, but they do have all of their health data by zip code. So at this point, I understand in the beginning, they have much less information than they do now. Testing is much more prevalent. It's much more accessible. There's fewer barriers to be tested. And so I believe that right now, there really is more access to information to make more surgical decisions on what stays open and what is closed. And I think expanding the geographic area that is narrowly limited to what is actually going on inside Portland is not a good decision. We have more information than we've ever had. This is the time to allow our economy to expand and not contract if it is safe based on the public health standards that we've had all along.
Thank you, Christine. So this is another question that Representative Meek answered. What can be done to resolve the antiquated state unemployment insurance program? There's 90,000 PUA applications that haven't even been looked at. Other claims are being rejected for no particular reason. When people call, the phone lines are jammed, and it just gives continuous busy signals.
Yeah. So this is an issue that I have been really candid and public on my disappointment in how this agency has responded to this moment of crisis. They had the opportunity to be nimble, to operate like the private sector should. They have chosen to add hours, add shift, add callers, use technology more wisely, find partners in the private sector, but prioritize getting these benefits out to Oregonians. Part of the pressure that we're seeing around issues like eviction moratoriums is because people aren't getting the money that they're owed. People, if you have 90,000 people in Oregon who don't have access to pandemic unemployment assistance right now, that they are eligible for that money, then they are feeling the pressure of these closures in a way that's very real and very scary. And the stories that I've heard inside my office, and I'm sure Mark has heard similar stories, are devastating. And so I'm going to admit that I feel like working with the interim director, that David has actually really upped their game. It's not enough. It's not fast enough. But we now have people that we can directly connect to in that office. We can get questions answered immediately. We're partnering with them in a different way and providing the information that allows them to expedite claims. We're basically, in some ways, legislators who are willing to do so are serving as their outsourced call centers. People are calling us. We're getting all the information that the employment department needs to answer these questions. We're giving them to the department on a spreadsheet so that someone can literally input them into the system. And so we have been the workaround in some cases. It doesn't expedite, it doesn't move anybody to the front of the line, but we have been a way for people to provide information to us when they're getting a busy signal at the employment department. It's not good enough. The employment department has to do better, but I have seen progress there. Now, there's no excuse for the last, dozen years or whatever it's been that they have dragged their feet on actually moving forward at a faster clip on the computer system upgrades. I mean, let's be honest. We were at 3.5% unemployment. It was the perfect time to focus on a capital project like your IT system. It was the perfect time when there was so little pressure on their system and on their workforce to be able to transition to this new system. Now, it's going to take a long time until those numbers get back down again. And the focus, instead of being on what they need to do for computer upgrades in the short term for that agency, might be to just get through the day and make as much progress for Oregonians as they can. And so from my perspective, initially, it really was failed leadership. My conversations with the former director had a lot more to do with whether or not we empathized with their position, which certainly we did. And I wanted our conversations to be about performance. How are you going to serve Oregonians? How are you going to improve? Tell me what you're doing differently tomorrow than what you did today, because today was not good enough. And unfortunately, that director was not very responsive to that expectation. And I do feel like David has been. He's got a ways to go, but I do think he's made gains.
I think one of the suggestions that I've heard from many people who are just waiting to just be recognized that their application has actually been accepted, even though they haven't processed it, at least it's in the works,
Yeah.
is these people don't even know whether their application has been looked at all. And I think that's what's scaring them the most is, will anybody ever get to it?
Yeah. And I do have to say, and this is not ideal, but anybody that you hear of that has not heard back from the employment department should reach out to their legislator. Reach out to us and let us know. And we will make sure that you get their attention again. And so reach out. It's not the way it's supposed to go. But I would suggest that you utilize us right now, because we are actively engaged, all of us, in trying to work through this issue and be partners to serve Oregonians who so desperately need it right now.
Nice. This was also posed to Representative Meek. What is your feeling towards the movement to defund police departments while protesters riot, destroying private and public property, and then they're being released the next day with little to no bail?
So I am not supportive of moves to defund police. I'm not. I'm supportive of public safety. So I think that it's important to recognize, though, the reason that I can be supportive of public safety and not believe that a move to defund police is the right approach right now is because Oregon, for some time now, has been a leader nationally in how we approach public safety issues that might have challenges that relate to a mental health crisis, a domestic violence call, the sorts of issues where people are engaging with police where a social worker would better suit that moment. Our police often are paired with those folks, and that is how they enter into the field. Now, when you're talking about managing a riot, protecting private property, I mean, we're talking about just crimes. I mean, at some point, there's a huge distinction between looking at police and saying that they're not engaging in a culturally sensitive way with a community, or they're not being responsive to the mental health crisis that's going on across our entire state and nation. That we can address with different partnerships and a different approach. But it's so critical that from the perspective of Oregonians who live here, that they can feel a sense of confidence that when they are in our urban centers, when they are in our communities, that the police will continue to serve the role of maintaining safety for Oregonians. And certainly it should be a basic expectation that if you own private property and that private property is harmed, broken, stolen, that we will enforce our laws. We must continue to be a nation of laws, a state of laws, to be able to have economic vitality, to be able to have strong communities and families who feel safe, and frankly, that want to live here. We don't want to become the place in the nation where you don't feel safe moving to Oregon, because we have decided to not achieve any balance between all the needs that are out there and the interests that are out there. There's dramatic interests that always need to be balanced inside all the work we do inside the legislature. And defunding police just tilts too far onto one side and ignores the very real need we have to maintain public safety for Oregonians.
Shall we go with one more question, Kent, and then wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more.
Okay, so this will go to both of you. The governor's executive order to implement cap and trade affects 18 or so state departments and even affects building codes. The costs imposed by that were high when the economy was strong. Reversing her decision will help build unity and allow the state to reconstruct a budget around critical services. Will the governor take that action?
Should I lead, Mark? Is that okay? You were still on mute, so I thought maybe you wanted me to lead on this one. I do not believe that the governor's implementation of cap and trade by executive order is the right decision. I think that the better decision would have been to come back to the table and to have a conversation about how we can address emissions in our state in a way that doesn't cripple small businesses and hurt Oregon families. And I do think there's a path forward for that, but it will take a blank slate and a new conversation, because cap and trade was the wrong solution for Oregon from the beginning. Cap and trade was the solution for California and not for Oregon. And just to be clear, in California, they had budgeted to have almost $1 billion in revenues from their cap and trade program. During this coronavirus event that has impacted our entire globe, California's revenues from the cap and trade program they have down there was $25 million, not $1 billion, $25 million, which left their budgets that were dependent on revenues from that program deeply, deeply broken. And so even in California, even California is not coronavirus proof, as it turns out. And implementing cap and trade in Oregon and imposing further reliance on that mechanism for critical programming in our state would have been a real mistake. And it is still a mistake for the governor to bypass the legislature and assume that she is a government of one. Throughout these executive orders, she's been operating like she's a government of one. And she has expanded the role of some of her agencies, and she's taken a lot of actions that we now get to review within a legislative process. I think that accountability is important. I think balance in our process is important. We need a legislature, we need an executive, we need a judicial that are distinct. And for her to move forward with her executive orders and invest as deeply as she has, and to drive up costs in the way that this will absolutely do, must be reversed. She must pause these programs. We cannot afford right now to further risk what remains of our economy. And so I would really continue to encourage the governor to work across party lines and to approach these problems differently in a way that is more collaborative, with all perspectives being present through this process. But those executive orders that she's implemented have got to go on pause.
Thank you, Christine. Representative Meek?
Yes, thank you. And I think that, well, Representative Drazan is correct that the governor's response was in relation to the short session. And there was legislation that was supposed to be heard. And I agree with Representative Drazan. This needs to be a bipartisan agreement and process. And I do not feel, and obviously through the walkouts, that our Republican caucus and members didn't feel that their communities were properly represented in the negotiations for those. And so I am not as deeply familiar with what repercussions or ramifications the executive order will have, but I do agree that in times of crisis, we need to back away from political issues and work on what's very valuable and important to our communities, policy-wise and structurally, that will, especially in the face of some huge financial losses for our agencies. And so I'm hopeful that leveler heads will prevail, and that we are able to sustain the proper the priorities that we need to get our communities and our businesses and our students back to school, all of the above, and our workers get to receive the benefits that they need. And so I hope that answers the question, and thank you once again. Yeah.
Well, with that being said, on behalf of the Oregon City Business Alliance, I just want to thank each of you for being willing to be with us today. I know there's been a lot of juggling of schedules of these last few days, as once the governor announced that she was going to schedule the special session to start tomorrow morning, that put a lot of things in motion that both of you had to prepare for in order to participate in that gathering. So again, we're very, very thankful that you were able to spend the time with us today. I think the questions we had from our participants were excellent. I'm glad that they were able to join, and that both of you were able to go ahead and participate in responding to those questions. Continue to give us updates as the special session progresses. Hopefully it will be bipartisan. Hopefully we will accomplish many things in a short period of time. I also am familiar that another special session just dealing with the budget is planned for sometime this summer. And I know Representative Drazan, that's at the top of your list for a lot of different reasons. And Mark, you too, of course. So hopefully that all comes together sooner rather than later. So with that being said, I want to thank all the participants for joining us today. I'd like to again thank my co-hosts, Sherry Henson and William Gifford, and our Sherry Imes, who helped put together this whole event, the webinar. Next month, our speaker is going to be from Greater Portland, Inc. And Representative Drazan made an interesting comment there towards the end. When people see all the videos of downtown Portland right now, are they going to want to live here? And that's the role of Greater Portland, Inc., is to attract businesses from all over the world to move to Portland. And I think you're going to see some real changes, not only in just the businesses that are already here that might be leaving the urban core and going out to the suburbs, but there's going to be a lot of other businesses that had Portland at the top of their list and may be giving it a second thought. So we'll hear directly from them to go ahead and give us some really current and updated statistics and insights on that important subject. So with that being said, everybody stay safe. Don't forget your mask, and we will see you again soon. Thank you for
all.
joining us today.
Thank you. See you tomorrow, Representative.
Yeah, see you soon.
Right.